Every year since 1993, World Water Day is celebrated 22nd March. It raises awareness and inspires action to tackle the water and sanitation crisis. Thanks for joining me on the news. And on that note, World Water Day, plotting water stress beyond the Middle East. Ukraine IMF reaches agreement on $15.6 billion loan. Parliamentary interrogation faced by Boris Johnson over Partygate. Syrian government says Israel fired missile raid on Aleppo airport, and Russian leader cautions United Kingdom of worn-out uranium tank shells for Ukraine. Stay with me for these and more stories. The United Nations tagged March 22nd as World Water Day with the goal of quantifying the world's progress towards providing everyone with clean, accessible and affordable water. 2.3 billion people, or one in the world's population, live in water-stressed countries, according to United Nations Water. Water stress refers to the proportion of freshwater usage equated with renewable freshwater sources. When water withdrawals exceed available resources, a country is either reducing its aquifers quicker than they can be replaced or has significantly high levels of desalination water production. 7 out of the 10 most water-stressed nations are in the Middle East and North Africa. In those countries, the average water stress level is 820%, which means that the yearly water withdrawal is 8 times higher than the water supply from renewable resources. The Middle East has a mainly dry and arid climate with low rainfall and severe temperatures. To provide their residents with enough water, several countries in the region, specifically in the Gulf, rely on the distillation, a process that removes salt from seawater. The countries with the highest water stress levels were Egypt, 6,420%, Bahrain, 3,878%, and the United Arab Emirates, 1,708% as of 2017. Water stress levels across the Middle East and North Africa from 1987 to 2017 doubled from 8,411% in 1987 to 16,422% in 2017. In Egypt, water stress levels have added from 4,897% in 1977 to 6,420% in 2017. The country, with a population of over 100 million people, depends heavily on the waters of the Nile River, which originates outside its borders. Egypt is facing an annual water deficit of about 7 billion cubic meters, 247 billion cubic feet, and the country could run out of water by 2025, according to a 2021 UNICEF report. Talking Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine and International Monetary Fund says it has reached a staff-level agreement for a 4-year financing package worth about $15.6 billion, offering funds the country requires as it continues to defend itself against Russia's invasion. The contract, which must still be approved by the MIF's board, takes into consideration Ukraine's track to ascend to the European Union after the war. On Tuesday, the fund said its executive board was anticipated to deliberate approval in the coming weeks. Gavin Gray, IMF official, in a statement announcing the agreement, said the overreaching goals of the authorities' program are to sustain economic and financial stability in circumstances of exceptionally high uncertainty, restore debt sustainability, and support Ukraine's recovery on the path toward EU accession in the post-war period. On Tuesday, IMF staff informed board members of the pact, which will be Ukraine's biggest loan package since Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, and the board was supportive, a source familiar with the matter said. If agreed as anticipated, the Ukraine program will be the IMF's biggest loan to a country involved in an active conflict. The fund last week changed the rule to permit fresh loan programs for countries facing exceptionally high uncertainty without naming Ukraine. The world lender said the agreement was anticipated to assist release large-scale funding for Ukraine from international donors and partners, but did not elaborate. Typically, International Monetary Fund loans opens aid for the World Bank and other lenders. Calculations have in the past projected the cost of reconstruction in the hundreds of billions of dollars. According to Gray, a gradual economic recovery is expected over the coming quarters as activity recovers from the severe damage to critical infrastructure, although headwinds persist, including the risk of further escalation of the conflict. Denis Shmyhal, Ukrainian Prime Minister, lauded the agreement and thanked the MIF for its help. Janet Yellen, U.S. Treasury Secretary, whom last month paid a surprise visit to Ukraine, hailed the agreement after months of pushing for the IMF to move forward with a fresh financing package for Ukraine. The United States is the MIF's largest shareholder. Now, ahead of a televised questioning that could determine his political fate, Boris Johnson, Britain's ex-Prime Minister, has said he carelessly misled Parliament over the Partygate scandal, but blamed top aides. On Wednesday, the former Prime Minister re-enters the bear pit of parliamentary inquisition for the grilling by the Cross-Party Privileges Committee that is set to reopen old wounds. Parliament's Committee of Privileges is investigating whether Johnson, who was evacuated from Downing Street in September last year, deliberately or frantically misinformed Parliament in a sequence of reports about the rule-breaking parties. If the committee finds Johnson deliberately misled Parliament, then he could be suspended from the House of Commons, the lower house of the Parliament. Any suspension longer than 10 days could trigger a by-election in his constituency. The Partygate scandal highly contributed to the downfall of Johnson after months of statements that he, alongside other senior government officials, had been present at alcohol-fueling meetings in Downing Street during 2020 and 2021, when most of the rest of Britain was forced to stay at home due to coronavirus restrictions and lockdowns. The outcry and repetitive allegations of lying eventually stoked the resignations of much of his top team of government ministers, including the present Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Johnson's resident supporters insist he was betrayed by Conservative colleagues and are campaigning for his return ahead of a general election expected next year. Johnson, ahead of the televised hearing, was willful as he released a 52-page report explaining his belief that he was truthful when he told the Commons on numerous occasions that that all the COVID rules were respected. In hindsight, he recognized that he did mislead the House, but only inadvertently and based on assurances given by top aides that the rules were being followed. Johnson was penalized by police for one Downing Street gathering, along with Sunak, his then finance minister. The ex-Conservative leader apologized and amended the parliamentary record last May after earlier asserting to MPs that the meetings were above board. According to reports, Syria's Aleppo airport has been hit by an Israeli air raid, causing some material damage. In the second strike on the facility this month, the Syrian Defense Ministry has said. The third attack recorded on Aleppo International Airport in 6 months. Israel fired a numerous of missiles from the Mediterranean Sea west of the coastal city of Latakia at 3:55 a.m., the Defense Ministry said early on Wednesday in a statement. Citing an anonymous military official who did not mention if the strike caused any deaths or injuries, the report said Israeli warplanes fired the missiles toward Aleppo, Syria's biggest city and once its commercial center, while flying over the Mediterranean Sea, according to reports. The Israeli military refused to give a comment on the newest attack, report said. Aleppo International Airport has been a key channel for the flow of humanitarian support into the country since a 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit southern Turkey and northwestern Syria on February 6, killing over 50,000 people, including over 6,000 in Syria. According to reports from Syria, earlier this month, an Israeli air attack on Aleppo airport had destroyed a runway which was taken out of service, forcing the rerouting of relief supplies to Damascus and Latakia. Israel has carried out hundreds of air attacks against Syria, but seldom takes responsibility. Israeli officials say the raids are targeted at alleged Iranian-sponsored weapons dumps and personnel. The attacks are said to be part of an increase of what has been a low-intensity conflict against what Israel describes as Israel-linked aims in Syria that backed President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war which began in 2011. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has cautioned that Moscow will be forced to react if the United Kingdom provides Ukraine with armor-piercing tank ammunition that contains worn-out uranium. On Tuesday, Putin was responding to information from UK's Minister of State for Defence, Annabel Goldie, who had confirmed that ammunition containing depleted uranium was part of a military support package being sent to Ukraine, along with Challenger 2 battle tanks. The United Kingdom announced not only the supply of tanks to Ukraine, but also shells with depleted uranium. If this happens, Russia will be forced to react, Putin said, according to reports, after discussions with Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the Kremlin. If all this happens, Russia will have to respond accordingly, given that the West collectively is already beginning to use weapons with a nuclear component, Putin said, without explaining. In reaction to questions about the ammunition, Goldie said on Monday that alongside our granting of a squadron of Challenger 2 main battle tanks to Ukraine, we will be providing ammunition, including armor-piercing rounds, which contain depleted uranium. The ammunition was highly effective in defeating modern tanks and armored vehicles. Depleted uranium is a byproduct of the nuclear enriching process used to make nuclear fuel or nuclear weapons. Its heaviness gives itself for use in armor-piercing rounds as it aids them easily penetrate steel. The United Nations Environment Programme has defined such ammunition as chemically and radiologically toxic heavy metal. The UK's Ministry of Defence dismissed Putin's warning on Tuesday, saying the armor-piercing shells had been standard equipment for decades and were nothing to do with nuclear weapons or capabilities. The ministry accused Russia of intentional deception for describing the ammunition as weapons with a nuclear component. On more stories, Biden administration launches 2 latest national monuments. On Tuesday, Joe Biden, United States President, has launched 2 new national monuments securing closely 200,000 hectares, that's 500,000 acres, of wilderness in the states of Texas and Nevada. The announcement comes almost a week after his administration approved a controversial oil drilling project in Alaska, the biggest such proposal for federal lands. Biden named Castner Range in Texas and Avical Army in Nevada, also known as Spirit Mountain, as national monuments under the authority of the Antiquities of Act of 1906 while speaking on Tuesday at the White House Conservation in Action Summit. He also issued a presidential memorandum to Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, calling on her office to assign some 2 million square kilometers, 777,000 square miles of ocean south of Hawaii as the latest national marine sanctuary. Our country's natural treasures define our identity as a nation, Biden told the summit audience. They are a birthright we have to pass down to generation after generation. Tuesday's announcement marks another measure towards Biden's aim of conserving 30% of U.S. land and water by 2030, part of an executive order he issued in January 2021, 1 week after his inauguration. But the announcement was not without controversy. For years, indigenous tribes and conservation groups had pushed the government to name Afikwame a national monument, and Biden teased added security for the area in November at the first White House Tribal Nations Summit in 6 years. In Afghanistan, Pakistan earthquake, at least 12 people killed. No less than 12 people have been killed and over 200 injured after a powerful earthquake hit large parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan. The 6.5 magnitude quake destroyed buildings, caused landslides, and sent people running into the streets. It rocked on Tuesday evening, centered in a mountainous region in Afghanistan's northeast, close to the border with Pakistan. Shocks from the remote Jom Valley were felt as far as India. 9 of the confirmed deaths were reported in the valley region of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan. The country's health ministry spokesman said 3 others were killed in Afghanistan. A child was among those killed in the Laman province near the country's border with Pakistan, according to reports. Numerous families had been out of their homes celebrating the Persian New Year or Nowruz when the quake hit, but the damage found so far has been less than feared, emergency workers in area said. The aloofness and rough terrain, however, affected areas that is likely to slow relief and rescue work. Many in the affected regions braved near freezing temperatures to sleep outside after the quake, fearing aftershocks. Some had dashed out of their homes barefoot when they felt the tremors. Shehbaz Sharif, Pakistani Prime Minister, has asked disaster agencies to take emergency steps to assist people. Shocks were felt over a 1,000-kilometer area that spans India, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan, according to the European Mediterranean Seismological Center. Earthquakes are possibly in this region because it lies in the juncture of the Eurasian and Indian tectonic plates. Over 1,000 in June last year were killed after a magnitude 5.9 quake hit Afghanistan's Paktika province, the country's deadliest in closely a quarter of a century. In the shores of Africa, Chad says over 400 rebels sentenced to life in prison over ruler's death. On Tuesday, over 400 rebels in Chad were handed life sentences following the death of ex-ruler Idriss Déby Itno, who was killed in 2021, a public prosecutor said. They were sentenced for acts of terrorism, mercenarism, recruitment of child soldiers and assaulting the head of state, said Muhammad El-Hajj Abanana, prosecutor for the capital in N'Djamena, after a mass trial. He did not give an elaborate figure for those jailed, saying only that more than 400 were sentenced to life, while 24 others defendants were acquitted. The trial opened last month behind closed doors at Klesum Prison, 20 kilometers 12 miles southeast of the capital. The country's major rebel group, the Front for Change and Concord in Chad FACT, in early 2021 launched an offensive on the north of the country from bases in Libya. The army on April 20th declared that Marshal Déby, Chad's iron-fisted ruler for the preceding 3 decades, had died from wounds sustained in the fighting. Déby died just after being declared victor of a presidential election that gave him his 6th term. His death was announced just a day after he had been declared winner of a presidential poll that gave him a 6th term in office. He was instantly succeeded by one of his sons, General Muhammad Idriss Déby Itno, who took the helm at the head of a 15-member military junta. I'll go on a short break, and when I come back, I'll bring you stories from Nigeria. Stay with us. Welcome back. Here are stories from Nigeria, and I begin with President Muhammadu Buhari discard bill letting NAS to subpoena President Ahmed Lawan. The Senate President has stated that the Senate will probe the 19 constitution alteration bills dismissed by the President, Major General Muhammadu Buhari, retired. Lawan made this known during plenary on Tuesday. In January, the National Assembly had transmitted 35 constitutional alteration bills to the President for approval. But last week, Friday, Buhari assented to 16 out of the 35 bills. Lawan noted that the most striking of the 16 bills that Buhari approved was the 5th Alteration Bill number 6, which makes provisions for financial independence of state houses of assembly and the judiciary. The first of the 19 bills rejected by Buhari was the 5th Alteration Bill number 24, which sought an act to alter the second schedule to the 1999 Constitution to empower the National Assembly and state houses of assembly to subpoena the president and governors to answer questions on matters on which the national and state houses of assembly have the powers to make. The rejected was Alteration Bill number 7, which sought an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to compel obedience or compliance with legislative summons. Also rejected was the 5th Alteration Bill number 29, which sought for an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to provide for a State of the Nation and State of the State address by the President and Governor. Rejected also was the 5th Alteration Bill number 22, which sought in an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to specify the period within which the President or the Governor of State shall present the appropriation bill before the National Assembly or House of Assembly. Also rejected Bill number 30, which sought an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to include former heads of State National Assembly in the Council of State. Also rejected was Bill number 14, which sought an act to alter the 1999 Constitution to move fingerprints, identification, and criminal records from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent legislative list. On contempt of court, NJC asked to order courts to reject EFCC cases. Abdul Rashid Bawa, the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, may be in for fresh trouble as over 250 constitutional and human rights lawyers have called on the National Judicial Council to direct all courts in Nigeria not to entertain cases brought before them by the EFCC. The lawyers, who said this was part of the resolutions reached at the end of their annual conference with the theme Democracy and the Rule of Law, held in Abuja between March 20th and 21st, 2023, said it will only be appropriate for Nigerian courts to entertain EFCC cases when Bawa must have purged himself of contempt by obeying all subsisting court orders binding on them. They made the call during the presentation of their annual communique on Tuesday, just as they called on political parties in Nigeria and their candidates to be cautious of the need to preserve Nigeria's democracy and by adhering to the provisions of the law guiding post-election matters. Reading the communique, the newly elected president of the Judicial Integrity Lawyers, Jill Law, Barrister Idoko Godwin, said politicians were advised against sponsoring crises across the nation to demonstrate their grievance, as sponsoring post-election crises will negate the supremacy clause of our Constitution as stated in Section 1, subsection 2 of the 1999 Constitution. The lawyers observed that the timing of the conference was of great importance, considering the fact that the nation was still battling with the fallout of the various elections, adding that many salient issues regarding the place of the rule of law in Nigeria's struggling democracy had been thrown up. They noted that the insistent abuse of power by public officials in Nigeria was an aberration which had attained notoriety as part of the fabric of the Nigerian society, insisting that equality before the law was the only protection against the spectre of oppression and undue influence that those in positions of authority will otherwise dangle over the heads of ordinary Nigerians. About 25 lawyers representing the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria jointly presented the communique on behalf of the over 250 lawyers in G-Law. On the EFCC board, the lawyers maintained that an official who was convicted was made by an order of a court or courts of competent jurisdiction was not considered fit to continue presiding over the affairs of a law enforcement agency, especially one constitutionally set up to fight corruption. The lawyers seized the opportunity to announce the constitution of a new leadership thrown up after the G-Law election held on Monday. And finally, on the news, federal government takes off 5% excise duty from telecom. After 6 months of strong deliberations with the telecommunications industry stakeholders, the federal government has exempted finally the telecom sector from the 5% excise duty approved in 2020 to be paid by all sectors of the economy. Federal government said it was convinced that including the sector in the excise duty would reduce the activities of the sector, which was already battling with over 41 taxes and levies already. Federal government depend on the reports of the Presidential Committee on Review of Excise Duty in Telecom Sector, which discovered that the sector was already overtaxed. The Association of Licensed Telecom Operators in Nigeria, ALTON, has already hailed the government for the incisive decision, saying it has shown positive response to the plights of individual sectors of the economy. The fresh 5% excise duty is part of the latest Finance Act signed into law by the President in 2020. It is indeed intended to be collected by the Nigerian Customs Service, and President Buhari had given directive that it can be enforced on all telecom service providers in the country on all local and foreign goods and services. Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, had urged stakeholders to support the implementation, saying the decision was informed by the dwindling revenue of the federal government from oil and gas. She said other countries in Africa, including Malawi, Uganda and Tanzania, among others, have all keyed into the revenue generation pattern. However, in August last year, when implementation of the duty gathered momentum, Minister of Communications and Digital Economy Issa Pantami took a swipe at federal government's plans to impose 5% excise duty on telecommunication services in the country. He also promised to use every legal instrument available to fight the decision, as according to him, the decision didn't go through wide consultation, adding that if the decision was allowed to stand, it will affect the sector negatively. The minister argued that the sector, which was already attracting huge revenue, creating jobs and adding huge revenue to the GDP, should not be overburdened with such taxes. Eventually, in September 2022, the federal government suspended the duty for telecom sector and constituted a committee to look into the burdens of the sector with the intention to finding out if the 5% excise duty will frustrate the sector's growth. However, in Abuja yesterday, Pantami broke the news that the federal government has finally agreed to exempt the sector from the excise duty. A recap of major stories says World Water Day, plotting water stress beyond the Middle East. Ukraine IMF reaches agreement on $15.6 billion loan. Parliamentary interrogation faced by Boris Johnson over party gates. Syrian government says Israel fired missile aid on Aleppo airport, and Russian leader cautions UK of worn-out uranium tank shells for Ukraine. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Reki.